Howdy, folks. Today we are going to continue with looking at React. So we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to get into the basics of React and really how it's set up and how it works and how you write the code for it. We won't get too deep into it yet, but I just want to give you an overview of how it works. The first thing we're going to look at actually is a very helpful module called Create React App. Now, why do we utilize this? Because otherwise, there's a number of tools that are used for React. There's Babel, which we covered in the previous video. There's Webpack, which is a whole beast into of itself. There's React itself. There's the React DOM, which is a totally different thing that you need to pull in. And there's testing libraries. There's various Webpack plugins. It's very, very complicated to get a full React setup working, and that's kind of the price we have to pay in order to have the ease of development, is that something's got to be complicated. Well, Create React App actually gives you a full system and just installs that system. It grabs all the packages for you. It grabs all the necessary code. It sets up a sample app, and it's very handy for beginning developers. So let's take a look. What we're going to do is we're going to run npx create react app and then a name. So React app. This name here is a directory that gets created, and it'll be the name of your application. Now you might be wondering, well, what is npx? That's kind of interesting. We've worked with npm, but what is npx? Npx, so when we install something with npm, it downloads that package contents and installs it onto our computer, and then it's there forever. You might not want that. You might just have an application or a package that you just want to run. You just want to execute the binary, or not binary, but you want to execute the script that comes with it, and then you just want it to go away. npx does that. What npx does is it will take a package name, so this still has to be a proper npm package. It downloads those files to a temporary location, automatically executes the binary script with the things, and then as soon as the script is done, it deletes those files. It may hold on to them for caching purposes, but they're not permanently installed onto your system. So it can be very helpful for stuff like Create React App, which you may only want to run a couple times. So we run it. Runs through a bunch of stuff. Creating a new React app in bootcamp/React app. You can see again that was that directory. Installing packages. This will take a couple minutes. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll come back when it's done. All right. So that install is done. It took, I want to say, about 50 seconds on my machine. If you're on a slower connection or a slow computer, it may take longer. So let's see what it actually did to start off with. So first of all, it did its full install. It added 1,400 packages. That's a lot of packages. Not all of those are necessary to do React development. You can get a slimmer version, but Create React App includes a bunch of other things that are helpful. So it pulls in a lot of packages. If you see this unsupported engine, what this means, you can see required node version 12.13, 14.15, 16.10, or above 17. I currently have node version 16.7. I would say as long as you have one of these minor version or major versions and you're a little bit off, it's probably not a big deal. You can probably ignore these. If, for example, you have a package that says, hey, I need version 17 above of Node, and you've got version 15, you might have a problem then. But I wouldn't worry about that too much as long as you have the major version. So what it did after that, it installed some template stuff. It installed a couple more things, and we got some more errors here. And then success create React app. You can run several commands: npm start, npm run build, test, run eject. So run eject. Well, actually, let's take a look at the code to start off with. Let's just see what it does. So we go into bootcamp, and then we pull in React app. So it's actually kind of simple. We have a source directory with our app. We have a public directory with index, a couple logos, manifest, etc., and nothing else. So in a normal React program, you would actually have a Webpack config file, you'd have a Babel config file, you'd have a bunch of configuration files down here. Create React App hides all that from you. It makes it so you don't have to deal with that. If at some point maybe your app is getting really complicated and you realize you do need to change Babel, or you need to change Webpack, you need to tweak something about it, you can say npm run eject. And if you run eject, basically what it does is, like it says, build directories, configuration files, and scripts get moved into the app directory. So basically, it unrolls the create React app wrapper that's been placed around this application. There's all these there's all these scripts in here, React scripts. If you eject, these all get rolled back out, and so the application still stays the same. It just becomes a lot more complicated because there's more files in the system. Sometimes you need to do this because you need access to those configuration files. Anyway, you can see we've got some testing stuff. We've got React. We've got Web Vitals. Not completely sure what that does. Bunch of stuff that's put in here. And it's given us a sample React app. So let's run this first. So I'm going to go into React app and npm start. Remember, if you're running the start command, you don't have to put run. So for every other command, npm run build, npm run eject. For start, you just say npm start. You can say npm run start and it'll be fine. But npm start will also work. So you notice when we ran this, it said start in the development server and it actually opens the page for you, which is kind of nice. Unless you have to restart the development server a bunch of times and it opens a new tab every single time. Less nice. It does take a little while to build for larger applications. For this simple one, pretty simple, compiled successfully. Here's our React app. It's got this little spinny thing. It says edit source App.js and save to reload. Learn React. Cool. Our app is working. It's also set to hot reload. So, and that's a Webpack feature that Create React App sets up for you. So if you make changes to these files, it will reload the page automatically as long as you save. Which is why a lot of front-end developers and back-end developers, I guess, we have our VS Code set to automatically save files whenever we leave the window. So if you're in something, you're typing frantically, and then you click to your browser, VS Code behind the scenes just saves, and then your browser refreshes, which can be kind of nice. Anyway, let's see what we got. So everything starts from index.js, always does. So we're pulling in React and React DOM. We're pulling in our CSS, and we're pulling in our app. Okay, that's the big thing to care about for now. So now here is the modern React 18 way. React 17 and 16 don't work this way, but this is React 18 of how to handle stuff. First of all, we create a root. What is root? Well, that basically, it takes in a DOM element, which has to exist previously. So if I go into our HTML here, a bunch of stuff in here. But you can see here's root. This is where the application will be rendered to. React is commonly used to take over the entire page and render whatever, but you could actually have some non-React code in here and then just a little piece of it be React. React is okay with that. So we've got our root here. And in our index, we're calling create root on this element. Doesn't have to be the root element. You can put on any element, but that's just common. What that does is that sets up with React and says, hey, this element, you own this element. Nothing else should be putting code in here. If it does, you can override it. This element on the page belongs to you. Now, again, if you're working with a full React application, that it's all React, you don't really notice the difference because React controls everything on the page anyway. But if you're doing a hybrid application, which is still not uncommon, I guess, then React needs to know specifically which piece of the page it can control and modify. And that's what this root does. You're telling it, hey, here's the piece, own this. You can create multiple roots, and there's a couple reasons why you might want to do that, but that's a more advanced topic. And then the next thing we do, and notice that came from React DOM. React DOM/client, these are utilities that can be used to help with React. React itself doesn't know how to render to a root like this. React DOM does. So now we call root.render. And this React strict mode, this is just a way of a specific component that React gives us that enables some strict checking to make sure your application isn't going to break at certain points. It doesn't actually do anything in production. It just completely turns itself off. But in development mode, it gives you errors and warnings that can be helpful to let you know when your application might not behave the way you expect it to. So notice this is JSX. That is a component, a React component. And in here, we've got another component app. Very common to have components each in their own file. That's a very common thing. Because each component encapsulates a single piece, and you want to have that, like, you don't want to have multiple components in one file necessarily, because that could get confusing. So we have our app component Commonly in React, you call your top level component app because it represents the application. And normally at this render, you put your context. So if you have your context, you would put context in here, and we'll get to that. But you generally only have app and things that wrap app and provide the application with stuff. Anything else usually goes inside app. Not complete. You don't have to do that. You could put your entire application in here, but it's just a little bit easier if you don't have to deal with this file too much. So let's take a look at app.js. So we're importing a logo. Remember, this is a Webpack thing. They can import logos and CSS, and it's a function. At this point, almost every single React component is a function. There are class-based components, but they're not as popular anymore, and there's a lot of problems with them. And not like they're buggy or they break, but like they're just harder to work with. So we use functional components most of the time. But just don't be surprised if you see a class component, because they are still around. They used to be very popular for things because it was the only way you could do lifecycle methods. So every single function for React, a React component, it's going to have a name, it's going to have some properties, which app doesn't have any, and then it's going to return JSX. This is JSX. We know that because it looks like HTML, but it's inside a JavaScript file, JSX. And at the end, you export default the component. Again, this is very boilerplate for a component. Important thing in here, oh, I guess they're missing this. Normally, you would actually import React at the top of this. They must have something special in Webpack that makes it so that that's not necessary. But if you find that you're getting errors, then you might want to import Webpack directly. So we've got our app. This is the top level thing that pulls class name from app.css. We've got a header, and that's basically it. So if we change this, we put a couple more dots in here and we save. We go back here, you can see it's automatically reloaded. So let's put something in here. We'll get rid of this. And what I want to do is I want to have another component similar to our previous JSX example. I got my app here. You can see now it's completely blank because I deleted everything. You also know this will give you warnings or errors. If you screw something up, like if you just put a bunch of random stuff in here, like let's see if I do a div and then end it with a bad tag, which it doesn't like, you can see it knows that's an error. There's an error here. Big, long, complicated error. You have to scroll up to figure out what the problem is. But also in development mode, it will put this error onto your web page. So it can be helpful to see when something actually broke. It will also go into, well, it should, into your console log. So if there's an error, you will see that there's an error. A lot of things will tell you that there's an error. It's kind of hard to not notice. All right, so let's make another component. So to do that, we make another file, and I'm going to call this labeled input, just like we had before. So I'm going to start off by importing React. This is something that I just do by default. It looks like that's not necessary for Create React App. I'm just used to it. Import React from React, and then I declare export default function labeled input. It's good practice, good hygiene to have your component be the same name as the file. Even though you're exporting default and the name technically doesn't matter, it just is less confusing if you have a bunch of functions in here. People can find very easily which one is actually your component that is being exported. We're going to turn. Now, here's the thing. In app, you can see they have this return and these parentheses around it. That is for style purposes only. That's to make things look cleaner so you can see clearly what the JSX is. These parentheses are not required. So you can say something like, here's a div. I tend to like the parentheses just because it makes it very clear that I'm entering a block of JSX so that it's clearer for me. The compiler doesn't care. All right, so we need our label, right? So let's add a property to here. We want to add a property as function things here. This is an object, the props object. Actually, you know what? Maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's just add name and then input type equals text. Okay, cool. We've got our component. This is a little chunk of JSX. We want to pull it into app. Well, the first thing we got to do is import it. Import labeled input from labeled input. To deal with a component in JSX, just like an index, we almost do it like it's an HTML tag. So labeled input, and you might notice this little slash here. If I leave that out, I get an error. It says no corresponding closing tag. Now, that's actually part of the HTML spec. HTML, if you give it this slash here, that tells it this tag self-closes. It does not have a closing tag. HTML doesn't actually require this. The browser is smart enough to know, like an input tag or a break line tag or stuff like that. Those are self-close. It doesn't need that tag to know that they're self-closing. JSX is not as smart as the browser. It requires that. So if you have something like labeled input that doesn't have children, you need that. You need to have that closing tag in there, or that slash. So we've got labeled input. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Okay, so now we've got name. Oh, you notice that's flex center. That's nice. So name and there. Here's our component. Now I want another one. Okay, so I'm going to grab another one, pop that in there. A couple more. They show up. But they're all name, and I want some of them to not be name. So what I want to do is I want to add a property. Just like in HTML, you would add an attribute, right? So I could say if it was an anchor tag, I'd do href. If it was an input, you could do type. Well, I can add something. I could say label equals name, label equals age, and label equals date of birth. Easy. So I go back here. Oh, it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything because I never told labeled input what to do with that data. And this is where props come in, okay? So every single function here, every single component has a props as the first element. So let's just console log that. Let's just take a look at our props. And you can see label, name, age, date of birth. They show up multiple times because it's been rendered multiple times. And React will just do that sometimes. It's an object containing whatever I pass into it. If I pass in foo here and set it equal to bar, well, you notice now that gets added as a prop. So how do we take advantage of that? What's an object? We can just handle it as we want. So we could say, and remember in JSX, we want we use, similar to handlebars where there was the curly braces to put something in the template, we use single curly braces, and this just becomes any sort of JavaScript statement. So I could say props.label. If I do that, you can see that label shifts and changes to whatever the property is. Now, doing it as props like this is not standard. You can do it this way, but what we usually do is we destructure each individual prop like this. And it's just kind of nicer and cleaner. And the reason we do that is because let's say you've got a long component that's not documented well, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, labeled input, how do I use this? I go to that file, and if it just says here props, then I have to look through every place props is used to figure out what the actual properties that I can pass to it are. Otherwise, if it's destructured, I can just glance and say, oh, label. I can probably guess what that means, and then I know to put it in here. So it's just a nice little thing in React that we do to make it so that it's easier to figure out what properties something takes. So yeah, JSX, you put this name equals value, similar to we do in HTML. The transpiling system magically converts that into an object where the key is whatever you put as the attribute and the value is your value. That's that. You can nest these as well. So like labeled input could have another nested component. There is no limit to how deep you want that to go. I mean, you can't go infinite because of computer systems won't really handle that. But for regular purposes, you can have something that has a child tree that goes all the way down in so many components. That is one of the powers of React, is I can take common stuff, things like this, and just say, yeah, here's a labeled input. Whenever I need an input that has a label on it, I just use this. And it's so much simpler than having to put all this code. That's just the beginning of it. But for now, that's a good start. We looked over how to use create React app. We looked over how this create root and this render works. And then we looked a little bit at how the actual components work and how you would load components into components. I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you all in class.